Welcome to SuperCoach. Thanks for joining me. We're going to take a look at some rookies today. Excitement is certainly starting to build towards the first game of the season on Thursday night. It's not far away now, and we really got to tighten in on some of the rookies, obviously, to finalise our side. I will say off the top, very difficult to take a guess at who is going to be named. We have a fair idea. Some have been told through the media that we'll definitely be seeing them, and others, there's always a few surprises in that first week of selections. There's a few guys that we probably expect to get picked that won't, but equally, there'll most likely be a few guys that maybe we didn't anticipate getting a game first up that do. And secondly, trying to predict how a rookie might score is extremely difficult. Over the journey, it has proven very tough to try and evaluate which ones might score more. What we can put a finger on is which ones will play in a position and a role that will be more SuperCoach friendly, but it is difficult. Not always can we just work out quite easily who the better scoring options are. Sometimes I think we've just got to lock them in if they're playing and back them in on a bit of the, small sample we've seen of their form. But look, I'll go through each line, and obviously first up, as we know, structure-wise over the whole field, we know the forward line is struggling for a few rookies. The back line is flourishing. There's plenty of options. The midfield always has plenty, particularly when you add in a few dual position guys. But I think definitely, I've said in a number of videos in the past that if we're going to be dividing our rookies and where should we have a few more of them, then clearly you can go with the back line a little bit more. There's certainly a few more reliable guys that look like they will be named. Of course, all that will be decided when we get the full teams out, but it looks very likely that that's where all the gems will be, and even some of the forward line options that do play. Often, at this stage, it looks like we're going to see, a few types that might be playing a bit more of your forward pocket style of setup, and as we know, we'd much prefer a rookie that can get a few cheap touches out of the back line and just work his way into the game, rather than maybe a youngster who might get starved up forward potentially. But anyway, I will get stuck into it now. Some of these names I think we should lock in. Others I'm just sort of putting on the radar for a bit of food for thought, and may even be cash cows during the season. Starting with the back line, and I will mainly look at guys maybe just over 200k, but obviously work my way down. Nick Caulfield, I think, is one of the main men in the back line for St Kilda, 171k. Defender and midfielder, but I think we should put him in that back line. He is a really quality halfback flanker, has looked great through the pre-season, and I think he'll be in many teams, and rightfully so. His job security looks really good, so I think he'll be an extremely popular pick. At 170k, Tom Cole of the Eagles. I think he'll get opportunity. West Coast is certainly going to be developing as a side. They've got quite a bit of young talent through there, and ones that they'll give opportunity. I don't mind Tom Cole. I think he can read the play quite well, but I do feel we've got quite a lot of other options, so therefore he's probably not the pick of them. So I think might be a guy that if he isn't named round one that we may look at down the track, but I think he'll play a bit of footy this year and will average solidly. Mitch Hibbert at 169k. I think he's a guy a lot of us would have had last year and just didn't quite get the scores or the games into him that we really wanted, so he finds himself pretty cheap once again. And if he's named, then certainly got to think about it. I think he's in that mix, has shown some reasonable form through the JLT, and it's always that little bit of a debate going with a guy who is in his second year, sometimes third year. They don't always get the opportunity in the first couple, versus an extremely talented debutant. So it's a bit of a juggling act. It's horses for courses, but certainly some guys, and in some cases you might go the slightly more experienced one, but there are a few types like Caulfield and this man, Aaron Norton, who are really looking very solid at AFL level, albeit pre-season games, but they do look pretty confident at that level, and Norton has done exactly that. He's at 166k and looked really safe overhead and just seemed to really fit into that Bulldogs back six quite nicely. Of course, Dale Morris has gone down, Marcus Adams has gone down. You would imagine that would then force Easton Wood back, but if they do, for whatever reason, stick with Wood in the forward line, then we can just about lock Norton in. He looks extremely likely anyway to take Morris's role, and even Easton Wood's role to an extent seems to be intercepting quite nicely. So I think he's just about a lock as well. Cam O'Shea, you could just about lock in the side if he's named round 1-2. 161k, 166k I should say, sorry, and he looked really assured. Didn't play a stack of game time for the Blues in one of the matches, but found it about 10 times and I think scored about 60 odd in SuperCoach from about 25% time on ground. So he has obviously been with Port Adelaide. He's the most experienced of all these guys. He finds himself at a cheap price, having not played for a little bit, and obviously found his way out of Port Adelaide and searching for opportunities. And he'll be a fairly experienced head in an otherwise inexperienced Carlton lineup. So I think he could be a real good option. All given, and as is the case with all these guys, we're just presuming that they do get named, and therefore we think they'll be a good pick. But if O'Shea's named, I dare say he'll be in just about every side. Lockie O'Brien, also at the Blues, he's 162k, the pick 10 of last year's draft. He's played a little bit through the pre-season, maybe hasn't looked as assured, but I mean, they all show glimpses, these youngsters, and I think he's probably one to maybe assess how he goes, and if he gets named, I don't think we'd be starting with him, because as I said, there's a stack of other options that we can pick, as I've already mentioned. Ed Richards of the Bulldogs, 135k. He was pick 16 and a classy halfback flanker. As we know, the Dogs, as I just mentioned, have lost a few players from their back six, and Murphy's left, Matty Boyd has left. Obviously, a couple of guys that came off a halfback flank. Could be one who finds himself getting some opportunity, whether that's round one or not. We'll wait and see, but I like him as a player. Tom Doty of the Crows, 123k. Looks to have put his hands right on that replacement role of Jake Lever. So obviously his game time looks very good and seems to be a really nice chance for round one. I wouldn't anticipate, and again, this is just, predicting, you wouldn't anticipate he'd be as big a scorer as maybe an O'Shea or a Caulfield, guys who are more the running types. Doty seems to be more of the guy who will find a little bit of that uncontested mark, short kick stuff, but maybe not really accumulating it like some of the others. But still, if his job security looks great and finds himself cemented in that side, it'd be hard to say no. Jeremy Finlayson, you can get him in the midfield as well, the young giant. Now, he's at 123k. We know there's a lot of spots, or competitive for spots at the Giants, so he's probably one that we're really going to have a look at through the round one teams. Could be a guy who does get a chance, but certainly there's a few players that might be in front of him, so he's probably a wait and see. Hugh Goddard of the Saints, 123k, probably the least likely of most of these guys that I mentioned, but I think he'll get opportunity at some point. Again, he doesn't seem to be of what he's shown through VFL and other stages, that he's probably not a scoring type, but there probably will be opportunity at some point for him to get a gig, so probably one to keep an eye on. Lockie Keefe, again at the Giants. We can get him in the forward line or the back line. Showed some good signs through the JLT, so I think if he's named, he'd be pretty hard to say no to, because he's an experienced body, obviously a former Pie. I think he'd be definitely a real likely type, and clearly if he was named, we'd be putting in the forward line, because options are fairly scarce. Sam Murray of the Collingwood Football Club, 123k. He's owned by nearly half of the teams. One of the more popular ones, of course, was traded to Collingwood. They went after him, they wanted him. Showed some really good signs in the final JLT game, and I think that'll be enough to see him line up in round one, and is another guy that seems to be a good chance to score reasonable points. I'm going to give this name a crack also from the Pies. Brody Majacek, I think that's somewhere near the mark, but he's at 102k. Again, a guy that might find himself in that back six potentially. Played a little bit of pre-season stuff, could be in the mix. As I've said, there's a lot of options. All these guys, I've got plenty of names, but all these guys are really good chances to play. So I think even if he was named, it'd be potentially unlikely that we'd even start him, but he's someone to keep an eye on. And David Mirror of the Hawks, also at 102k. He's been at Box Hill for ages. Of course, Birchall is going to miss a real chunk of the season. They're fairly young in that back line. He's a guy who knows the Hawthorn system very well. Probably didn't set the world on fire through the pre-season, but by all reports, he's certainly in the mix for a round one spot. So he's a guy to keep an eye on at a nice cheap option. And that's all I've got in terms of the back line. I say all I've got. There's plenty to have a look there. I mean, even when I found myself going through the forward line, I've probably still got a few names, but you just don't have the same confidence in them. But there's easily 7 or so guys that I just read out that could definitely play. So that's why we say you can definitely go heavy in the rookie department in that back line. Moving towards the midfield, starting at Robbie Fox at 232k, and this one's just a little bit more outside, and he's probably a little pricier than you'd like to take a bit of a punt on a guy like him, but of course showed some signs last year, and again he's looked okay, like that role type of player for the Swans. looked okay through pre-season. Now, he might play in it. He's probably a guy that could score reasonable, given he's been in the system for a bit and he's a bit older, but I wouldn't be endorsing him, but I've seen a little bit of chat about him. Corey Ellis of the Tigers, 228k. I really like him as a prospect. This sort of guy I thought would have kicked on a little bit more by now, so I know a few people are probably predicting he could be a guy that takes that next step, but we know he's a really nice ball user. He's a top pick of the past. I can't remember what number, maybe 12 back in the day, but I think he's definitely a guy that, if he does get opportunity, could score quite nicely, but also a guy that will probably most likely be forever on the fringe, at least in what is a strong Tigers outfit at the moment. So job security, definitely the question. Callum Brown at the Pies, 224k, a bit of a left field one here. I mean, I think if he can get an opportunity, I think he'll go quite nicely, and a bit of a outside smoky chance to play, but certainly you'd rather take a punt on a guy at about 150k than spending an extra 75. Cam Rayner of the Brisbane Lions, we all know about him, 202k, can get him as a forward as well. The number one pick, he'll get pushed to a flank more often than not, and obviously Brisbane's midfield's quite strong. You've got Zorko and Beams, but you've also got the likes of Bell, Robinson, Matheson, Berry, McCluggage. You know, there's quite a next generation brigade there, so I think you'd find it tough to really get some high midfield minutes. He'll go through there, but I wouldn't expect to see enormous scores. He's a tough, hard player. Probably liking some other guys slightly more than him, just because you do have to pay fairly top dollar for that number one pick, but I think he'll be fairly popular. Andrew Brayshaw I really like at the Dockers, 198k. I'm struggling to squeeze him into my side because you do have to reach pretty high when you go for these top picks of the previous season, but of all these higher end picks and guys that are priced a little bit higher than your normal basement, I think he's probably the one to go for. He's looked really good through the pre-season. The Dockers will be looking to blood these sort of guys, and he looked really assured, and he's probably, for mine, the one to get your hands on, and I'm certainly trying to open up a little bit of cash to jump up to him. Ben Jacobs at 200k of North Melbourne, of course, a guy who's caused us a bit of pain with his stopping work on our star midfielders. He'll probably get some game time and work his way back in the side, but I don't think we should be considering him. I've seen his name throughout the pre-season suggested, but I think you're better off going for a talented youngster rather than a guy who's more of a stopper and has never really shown an ability to score great. Paddy Dow at 193k has looked really good at times through the pre-season. That last JLT game might not have cost him around one berth, but just didn't cement his spot, because I think 2 good JLT games would have really seen him book a round one ticket. Given that, I'm probably preferring to go down to a few guys who are at 123k or slightly up to a Brayshaw, that sort of type. Or another man you might go to is Will Brodie at 187k from the Gold Coast. I really like him, a former top pick, another guy that, you know, a bit like I said with Hibbard before, the type that maybe didn't score the house down last year in his debut year, is still fairly affordable, will get opportunity. You know, most probably predict North Melbourne and Gold Coast will struggle. So particularly through that midfield, the Gold Coast will need guys like Brodie to take on a bit more responsibility and a bigger role through the engine room. So I really like that. He's in my team at the moment. Luke Davies-Uniacke and 189k. Similar to Dow, didn't really get going through the JLT. One would expect him to possibly be named anyway, just because North will want to give him that opportunity. Whether it's round one or not, we'll wait and see. It looks fairly likely. He's a popular pick, mainly on his draft reputation. I would probably err on the side of a few others. Just as I said, there's a few guys who have shown a little bit more around a similar price, or shown a bit more 60k south. So that's probably where I sit with a few of those guys, because if you are paying an extra 60, 70k, and that money can be pretty helpful if you're looking to upgrade elsewhere, if you're looking to pay that extra coin, you do want that extra bit of confidence, you know, in a talented draftee. So I think we probably just needed to see a little bit more through the pre-season from those fellas. Adam Chera, however you pronounce that one, from the Dockers, he's at 184k. Another guy I think could get a fair bit of opportunity. I won't be starting with him, but I think he's a fairly likely type, as suggested by his high selection in the draft. Not a bad option as well. Jaden Stevenson of the Pies, 180k. probably also a guy will be looking for his name on round one. He'll probably be in that mix, certainly on the fringe. Maybe didn't do enough to absolutely lock himself a spot through pre-season, but as I said, certainly in that mix. Hunter Clark of St Kilda really showed some great signs. He's quickly become quite popular in terms of this higher end draft selection guys. He's one of the more popular ones, and fair enough too. I think St Kilda are probably looking for a few types like that. Him and Caulfield really seem to be exciting everyone down at St Kilda, so they look quite likely for a round one debut. At 162k, Jack Tringo from Port Adelaide, of course, the former Demon. We all know his background with the injury woes and just had so much trouble with that body. I think it's pretty unlikely to see him named, but he might be a guy that gets an opportunity throughout the season that we can take a look at downgrading to. Obviously, real tough to trust that body. Port Adelaide have really got quite a bit of depth now, and you'd have to think Tringo is a bit down the pecking order, but at some stage in the season we might be discussing him. Bailey Bamfield at 123k of the Dockers, slightly mature age player, a bit older than your average drafty, and I think he will slot into that forward line at Fremantle. I think he's just about a lock. He's looked quite good, really happy knack around the goals, and seems to have really impressed. Charlie Constable of the Cats, 117k. He's really impressed through the pre-season, but I've seen his ownership go up a little bit, but I just couldn't see him getting named round one. Even if he does, it probably off the back of someone like a Dangerfield missing, so I couldn't see him playing consistent games. Geelong is so strong through that midfield, so while he has looked good through the pre-season and some really nice under-18 numbers, I would be steering clear of him. But one cat you've got to get on board is Tim Kelly. He'll be named round one, I'm just about sure of that. Mature age, ready to go. Geelong went after him with their first pick, clearly looking for a guy who is ready to go, and he hasn't put a foot wrong through the pre-season. He'll be named and a really good chance to score well. Paddy Nash of the Tigers, 117k. Of course, a talented father-son, a lot of excitement about him. I'd say it's pretty unlikely we'd see him named round one, clearly. I'm not even sure if he's played too much through the pre-season, to be fair, but obviously scrolling through, there's a bit of excitement by the ownership too, a few people getting on board. I'd have to think that's probably more to do with the hype around him, but he might be a guy that could be downgraded to at some point or involved in our trades. James Warpole at Hawthorn, of course, a hard-nosed junior, really gets people up and about when you hear that about a junior. Sort of suggests that they are ready to go at AFL level. Hawthorn looking for midfielders, all that sort of stuff gets people thinking maybe he's a chance. I'm not so sure he's going to be named round one, but again, he's probably more of a downgrade option. So that probably seems like he'll be a guy we look at during the season rather than starting. Don Barry, 117k, has to be in the mix, you'd have to say, because he has shown some good signs through a couple of JLT games. But again, Port Adelaide, strong side. Can he find himself in there in round one? Can he keep his spot? So there are a couple of question marks, and we'll watch Port Adelaide's starting 22 with interest. Nick Holman at the Suns, 102k. He's definitely a guy I think most people will start. Another mature age player, has been in the system before, and he's clearly looked the goods through the pre-season. Contested possessions, tackles, looks to be an extremely good option for our midfield at a nice cheap price. In the ruck, you probably don't have to think about it as much, because often that R3 position we assess if anyone's playing, and if they're not, we just go with a 102k guy, because you may as well save the most coin as possible. But Tim English might be a guy at 134k. Of course, there's a fair bit of excitement about him and what he could potentially bring to the game. He's still pretty raw, but that ruck position is certainly one that the Dogs haven't absolutely tied down. Roughhead and probably Trengove might get a bit of a look at it at certain times, Campbell and the like. So I think he might be in the mix, and wait and see on the teams. And Darcy Cameron's the obvious one. Given the injury to Naismith at the Swans, Callum Sinclair is out, but he looks to possibly be right for round one, if not early. So potentially, even if Cameron is named in round one, he may not, depending how the Swans want to approach it, he may not be in that side for too long. But we'll have to just see how the teams roll out over the next few days. In the forward line, and the forward line's definitely given us a few headaches, that's for sure, through the pre-season. A lot of concern about, are there going to be enough options? Will there be any genuine options? And there's not too many. I think if you want to look at it glass half full, there's maybe a handful of guys. If you want to get really critical, there's maybe only one or two that we can be super confident about. So Oliver Florent at 246, that's fairly expensive and I wouldn't be endorsing it, but I just wanted to mention him that I think he's a guy that could definitely up his ante this season, and while he's too pricey to pick, one would think, I think he's a really talented guy and looks to have a nice spot in that Swan side just by what he brings to the table. Paddy McCartan at 234k, I think he's in about 5% of teams, and look, he's obviously got plenty of talent, we all know that. Is a big key forward able to cut it at this level these days? Obviously the best can, but the way Paddy is sort of, the way he is, he's more of that high marking, real old school key forward, and we sort of see the best key forwards these days are quite mobile with, you know, Franklin and Kennedy and Danaher. So the jury's out whether he'll actually make it, but he is fairly popular. His numbers, I think, will definitely go up, but you'd be fairly brave to start with him. I mentioned Callum Brown, obviously in the midfield. I mentioned Rayner. Of course, you know, if you're going with either of those guys, particularly Rayner, you would start him forward. Darcy Fogarty, obviously of the Adelaide Crows, a high pick in the draft. He put himself on the map with a really good performance in one of the JLT matches, you know, kicking the 3 goals, plenty of marks. So, of course, Tex Walker is a guy who hasn't had the greatest pre-season, bit of concern about the body. I think regardless, I feel as if they'll look to play Fogarty, but again, while he looks the most likely type in that forward line rookie setup, to pay 150k, it's tough. I mean, we all know Adelaide has a dynamic forward line. Cameron has left it and those sort of things. So there should be a spot. But again, you couldn't say that he's cemented in that side. He's going to need to play some good footy, but given the lack of options, seems pretty good. Plenty of hype about Jack Higgins. We all know those numbers through the under-18s, but it has been alluded that he'll probably not feature straight away, but certainly feature at some stage, one would imagine. He's definitely one we'll be looking at the Thursday night game to see if he's named. Paul Ahern, 123k from North Melbourne. Former Giant, we all know his problems with the knees and the body, etc. Hasn't done stacks through the pre-season from what I've seen. I must say, it's, you know, he looks like a great option, but I'm not so sure he'll be named. Probably a guy that'll get games at some point. You know, he's a former top 10 pick, I'm pretty sure, so a guy that we'll definitely look at. Hopefully sooner rather than later. I mentioned Keith. Willie Rioli, 123k. Will he get up for round 1? I'm not so sure. We'll have to wait and see. Bit of a niggle. So I think the Eagles will definitely look to give him opportunity at some point. So we'll have to wait and see. And there are a few Eagles that could find themselves in our forward setup certain stages throughout the season as they give them opportunities. Daniel Venables is another one of those, 123k. I reckon he's the most likely of what is probably a quartet of Eagles that are in the mix. He looks like a really likely type, could slot into potentially half forward or even through the midfield. Jake Waterman's another sort of versatile 191cm bloke. I don't know much about him. I haven't seen him play too often, but he's at 123k. Liam Ryan is the other Eagle, 117k. Plenty of excitement about him taking big grabs, and you know, he's an exciting player. I'm not sure how much quantity we'll see from him. He probably comes into that category of should play. How will he score is anyone's guess. Bailey Fritz of Melbourne, 117k. He's a lock as far as I'm concerned. You know, we don't have a stack of options, and it looks all but certain that he'll play round 1. In fact, I think I recall reading that he was told he will debut. I'd have to double check, but it looks all but certain that he'll play. And Jared Garlett, 117k of the Blues. I didn't check the absolute extent of his injury, but I think it was a shoulder. Someone would definitely know a bit better than me out there exactly what it was and what happened and how long he'll be out for. But again, I don't know if he'll be a high scorer. Again, a bit like Ryan, probably a guy who'll get opportunity in a weak side. Could dish out the odd 30s and maybe get, you know, sort of needs a couple of goals and a few tackles to pump his scores up to about 80. Not so sure he's the most reliable option out there, but we don't have stacks. So that's pretty much how it's looking for our rookies. I think if you were wondering where you need to go in terms of those guys, I think that's about just about every name you need to think about. Some guys are locked and loaded. The rookies, as we know, basically everyone ended up having the same sort of setup, because we see who's named and we see the ones we've liked for a while, the ones that we knew might be on the fringe, and we get that decided throughout the teams. And basically we do end up having pretty similar ones. So you do have to make sure you get them right though, because having the good cash cows is what it's all about. They make you the money. They allow you to go up in price and downgrade and upgrade the others to premium. So that's what it's all about, getting on that rookie ramp. So it's certainly crucial. But yeah, thanks for joining me again, guys. I just thought I've been meaning to do a rookie video for the last week or so. Once the JLT is finished, of course, we get the best insight to seeing everyone and how it's all forming and the likelihood of seeing them first up. So gives us a fairly clear look. But all the best with selecting them. Hopefully we can nail them. And as I said off the top, we'll just need to wait and see, basically, for the round one teams, because that will unveil what we need to know. So thanks again. Subscribe away to the channel if you haven't already. Give the video a like, comment away, as I always say. And we'll pretty much now have a look at the forward line in terms of my relevant players for SuperCoach. There'll be the must-haves, the SuperCoach traps. I'll reveal my team, and that'll probably be it, I say. It's been a fairly big pre-season, but I think that's pretty much covered off everything I wanted to do. So time's quickly run out in terms of how many days are left to do certain videos, but I think I've prioritised to get everything that I felt was crucial in there. So that'll be great. But anyway, I'll be back soon. Cheers.